My name, like you said, is Wanda Braton, and I am the Conservation Livestock Program Director in the North Dakota State FSA office. We're located right here in Fargo. Do you want more?
You can, well, so when you say with your work with livestock, but also conservation, those two things sort of go
Yep.
hand in hand, but how to the average consumer, maybe that doesn't exactly make sense.
Well, with the different farm programs that we have 5 different program directors within the state office itself. So each division actually takes on some various programs within that farm bill. And so livestock and conservation, they do kind of go hand in hand. So that's what I work with mostly. All of our emergency programs, when it deals with any kind of livestock or drought situations, those type of things.
So the reason I wanted to visit with you, Wanda, was in talking with Marcy Severinson, who is the head of FSA for North Dakota. She said, if you need
Hmm.
someone who is awesome at talking about what is CRP, I should get a chance to talk with you, Wanda. So that's what I wanted to do because when I typed CRP into our sheet, I needed to make sure that I didn't type it
Hmm.
as CPR because that happens. So
Right.
tell
It
tell us
does.
about CRP in the world of agriculture and what you're dealing with on a regular basis.
Okay. Well, CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program, actually was authorized with the Food Security Act of 1985. The program at that time actually was started because of soil erosion and because it was a commodity surplus program, in which producers would offer their land for a per acre rental rate, and they would enroll their land for a 10-year period. Over the years, the CRP program has really evolved into an environmental type program. And in the recent Farm Bill, we look more at some of the climate change issues that we have going on in the world. And so, what the program is itself is that producers, it's a voluntary program. Producers, eligible producers who have owned land or operated land within a 12-month period, they would be eligible to come in and submit offers to participate in the CRP program and enroll their land into a 10 to 15-year program or contract in exchange for receiving a per acre rental rate or maximum payment rate. Um, the producers would also receive cost share assistance in order to establish those higher diverse conservation practices like diverse grasses, pollinator habitat for honeybees, or even shrubs or trees if you're looking at more of a wildlife type habitat.
And Wanda, what's the benefit for registering for the CRP for landowners? What do they get out of it? I mean, outside of you're going to get some extra money, but how does it benefit them?
Well, in exchange for entering into a contract, like I said, we do pay a annual rental payment. So for the 10-year period or 10 to 15-year period of the contract, producers who have enrolled their land into CRP, they receive a per acre dollar amount based on where that land is located, and they get that on an annual basis for that 10 or 15-year period. So
So,
they get compensated for having their
right,
land in.
but on average, are they going to be making more going that route than they are, farming the land? Or I guess it depends each year on
Well,
there's a number of factors that come in there.
there is. What the program is designed for is we have different, CRP is the umbrella, and we have a couple of different sub programs under that. So we have a general sign up, and that's actually what's going on right now. That sign up period started on February 27th, and it runs until April 7th. And that program is really for producers who want to enroll pieces of land that maybe they are marginal, maybe they're aren't producing quite as much as what they would if they were actually planting a commodity on it. Or maybe they have some multi-grass stands that they want to be able to just make more diversity in order to protect some of our resources, our natural resources that we have, like soil erosion or wildlife habitat or water quality, those type of things. So the producers themselves, they would have to make that decision whether or not they would want to participate in the CRP program, or either rent it out maybe to a producer to grow those commodities on it.
So, Wanda, when you said that about the conservation and where it's evolved to, how has this program changed? As a kid who was on the farm in the late 80s, I remember when CRP first came out, but I don't think it looks the same now as it did back when folks were first enrolling into it. Any big changes that come to mind for you as this program's changed over the years?
Well, like I said, when it first came out, there were only a certain kind of grass species that producers could actually establish on their land. You know, you could look at a introduced mix of like grass or alfalfa or brome, or you could look at more of a native grass blend. In some cases, depending on the topography of the land and the ecosystem, they could establish trees. Over the years, like I said, it's really developed into a environmental program. So some of those really highly sensitive areas where we might have critical habitats that just need to help generate maybe some grasses, maybe some wildlife, in order to be able to increase those habitats across the state or across the nation. So like I said, you'll see a variety of different type of conservation practices now. We have the water quality, where producers can put in strips of land along rivers and streams that helps filtrate out the nitrates before getting into the drinking water. We do have soil erosion, you know, so if your land has a high erodibility index, then they can put on that conservation cover as well. So it really has grown into what it is today.
There truly are a lot more acres involved than what we were seeing certainly at the onset of all of this as well. So, folks, it's 1:30 in the afternoon. Oh, Wanda, I'm going to ask you to answer that as soon as we come back. It's 1:30. We're going to come back.
Okay.
But I do want to know how we've watched that program grow over the years from the time of its inception to where we're at right now for some of the enrolled acres in CRP. So we're going to do that. And folks, stick with us. We'll be right back. So as we were going to break, one of the questions I had is, as someone who remembers when CRP first came on the scene in the late 80s, I know that the amount of acres has probably gone up or maybe has changed in how they're classified with CRP. Any backgrounds you can give to us about that, what it looks like today versus when it first started?
Sure. In North Dakota specifically, our high point was actually in 2007 when we had about 3.6 million acres enrolled, of acres of cropland enrolled under the Conservation Reserve Program. Today, we're looking at about 1.1, a little more than that's enrolled. So over the years, the program has, you know, we go through a general sign up, some of those big acres that were enrolled back in the 80s that have been re-enrolled over the period of time, over a 30-year period. Some of that land would have to be reestablished into some more of those diverse type species in order for it to be competitive on a nationwide basis. And we've seen some of those lands not getting accepted on a national scale, and then they go back into the production. So we have seen, you know, with the different farm bills, because the Conservation Reserve Program has to be reauthorized through every farm bill that we have. And then with every farm bill, then they revisit the statute or the maximum limitation of CRP within the nation itself. So right now, currently, our statute is limited at 27 million acres on a nationwide scale. And we have approximately 22 million acres nationally enrolled in the CRP program. So there is still room for acceptance into the program. But again, the program was never meant to compete with the ag commodities. But we do know that because you're enrolling land into a 10-year agreement, we do have an inflationary rate that's added into that maximum payment rate that we pay those producers who participate, along with an adjustment for productivity factors. So sometimes it looks like it's competing, but if you look at it on the long scale, it's not meant to actually go that direction.
And Wanda, you said this will be tied in with the new farm bill. Is there any chance of a decrease or increase in the new farm bill?
That's always a question. We don't really get any of that information until the new farm bill is passed. So that would probably be a question that you'd want to ask your legislation.
Interesting.
Well, we can dash off notes right now, you guys. Everybody send their emails.
There you go.
Right.
I got a question for you, Wanda, here. There's a recent article kind of talking about CRP, and in the article it says that when a landowner offers all or a portion of the tract of land, FSA ranks the land based on an environmental benefit index specific to the land offered, and the score is determined based on a tract of relative environmental factors. What is this EBI, or environmental benefit index? What goes into it, and what will get you a higher score, and what does that higher score mean to you as a landowner?
All right. So when I'm talking about CRP being the big umbrella, and the general sign up is where you really see that EBI score come into play. We also have a continuous sign up, which is really based on if there's a resource concern that can be solved by entering that land into CRP, if there's a water quality issue, if there's a habitat that can be restored. Under the general sign up, like I said, there doesn't necessarily have to be a resource concern that you're solving. However, there's certain lands that are eligible for general and certain lands that aren't. So if they're in a state priority area or a national priority area, like in North Dakota, we have the National Prairie Pothole region, and we also have a state priority area. Cropland that's located within those areas are eligible to submit offers for participation. When a producer comes in to actually submit an offer, we have to take a look at where that land is located specifically. Every soil in North Dakota has a certain dollar value that's attached to it, and that's how we come up with the maximum payment rate. But we also look at the factors on the land itself. So the EBI score is actually ranked. There's 6 different ranking factors. The first one being the wildlife habitat. You got wildlife habitat, you got water quality, you look at your soil erosion factors, you have your air quality, your enduring benefits, and then the final cost. The final factor is cost. The first factor is really based on what type of a conservation cover that producer is willing to establish on their land that they're offering. Of course, again, the more diverse that practice is, the more species that they have, the higher point score that they could receive. If they're coming into the program and they already have grass already established and it's been determined to be eligible, if it's a monoculture, unfortunately, under the N1A factor, they're not going to receive any points. A monoculture, a single stand, would not receive any points. So a producer would be encouraged to actually go in and do some interseeding or reestablish that cover to maybe go into a native grass blend with up to 4 to 5 species, or looking at a pollinator habitat that's consistent with our North Dakota policies that we have, in order to be able to receive higher points for that score. Some of those factors are all based on where that land is located. So if we have, like in North Dakota, we do have a wildlife priority zone. If that land that's offered is within that protected area, then that producer would actually receive additional points for that. So for a producer who comes in and they really want to maximize all their points, there's certain things that they can do. They can, under the wildlife habitat, they can agree to establish a higher diversity mix on that land. By putting in a food plot for wildlife not to exceed 5 acres, they could get an additional 5 points. If they're willing to even establish it to a native grass, but then put in a 10 acre pollinator plot, they could receive additional points. And just basically where it's located. Also, when you're looking at the cost of it, the producer, we would calculate, FSA calculates out what that maximum payment rate is. For every whole dollar that the producer actually offers his land for enrollment, they receive additional points for that. So there are different, when you're talking about the EBI, it's all based on where the land is located and what that producer is willing to do in order to enhance that with those enduring benefits.
Okay, so just in terms of the money aspect of this, and you said that you get points for putting more money into your land, But is the benefits from adding more points to your land going to outweigh the cost that it's going to cost you to do this? Are you going to get more in return for going out of your way and spending this money to improve the land in the long term?
So the general, like I said, the general sign up is very competitive. So it's all based on that point score. The higher point score that the producer receives, the better chances they have for that offer being accepted at the national level. The cost factor, there's always a hidden cost factor that we don't know what that is until after the sign up is done and the ranking is completed.
Right.
But so when we're talking about the return to the producer, of course, he would have to make that decision as far as what is the lowest offer he would accept per acre on that land.
Mm-hmm.
And then in order to establish that conservation cover that they've selected, we do pay 50% cost share in order to establish that land. And then we have a practice incentive, it's called a PIP payment, that actually pays for another 50%, 40% up front and 10% once that cover is fully established. So, you know, we pay for the eligible costs, you know, if what is recommended, if a producer wants to put more diverse even over what's recommended, then some of that cost might come out of their own pocket. But for the most part, we do help that producer establish those conservation covers that they've selected.
So Wanda, I was curious, when we've had announcements that suddenly there was emergency haying or grazing for CRP in years that it was extremely dry, et cetera, is there a specific criteria that goes along with that, or does that have to be a year-by-year application or request, if you will, to FSA for those emergency haying and grazing type situations?
Yep, it really goes based on the year. We look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, and we have whether or not a county falls into a D2 status, which is the severity of the drought. Of course, if they get into a D3, D4, those type of things, then they would qualify under the emergency haying and grazing provisions. If they are in a normal year, then of course those provisions would not apply. We do have a primary nesting season that producers are restricted to do a lot of activities, and that runs from April 15th to August 1st. So within that time period right there, producers have to request to perform certain activities in order to be able to do them during that primary nesting season themselves. When it comes to emergency haying, if they're in a drought status, that's not authorized until after that primary nesting season ends. But under the grazing, then we could have them work with our sister agency, the NRCS, and develop a grazing plan. Excuse me. For those type of activities.
So realistically, it's not so simple as, wow, I really need this extra hay, et cetera. There's a lot that goes along with it on a county by county basis, not necessarily a producer by producer basis. Okay. All right. And we've had years where that has certainly been the case. So we always have to be a little bit more cautious about when we can do it.
That's right. Yep.
So Wanda, as we are winding up our time together, if folks have more questions about CRP and they want to come on into the office to visit with you to answer those questions, what can they do, whether they're right here in Cass County or in other areas of the state?
We would ask that they contact their local county office and schedule an appointment to go in and visit with the county office staff and talk to them about whether or not their land is eligible, if they meet the producer eligibility, and then just take a look at what kind of a point score that they could obtain if they're looking at the general sign up. And if they have those very marginal, highly sensitive lands, then we also have the continuous sign up. Like I said, that's not competitive. And then we could offer some options for the producers or the landowners in order to enroll acres, smaller acres than the general, but enroll them in those type of practices as well. We also have fact sheets available. So for anybody that's listening, if they want to go into www.fsa.usda.gov, and you can go into the newsroom, you'll find all kinds of fact sheets that talk about the CRP program.
Great. Well, appreciate you taking some time out of your day, Wanda, to give us a little more insight on the CRP and a few spots where people can get some more information. It's 1:48 right now. We're going to get updated from the American Ag Network.